Brandon Ellis sat in his office, staring at the latest customer reviews of his 11-location restaurant chain. The words stung. Terrible service, rude management. I was ignored for 10 minutes before walking out. It wasn't just one bad review, there were dozens, all pointing to the same location. He built this company from nothing. He started as a dishwasher in his teenage years, working his way up, learning every corner of the restaurant business. He prided himself on quality food and even better service. But now, he didn't even recognize his own company. Brandon had visited that location before, but as the CEO, employees always put on their best behavior when he walked in. He needed to see the truth, unfiltered. That night, he made a decision. He would go undercover. Brandon spent hours planning his disguise. He dyed his usually dark brown hair a lighter shade, added subtle wrinkles with makeup, and wore thick framed glasses. He dressed in simple jeans and a faded hoodie. He looked nothing like the polished CEO people were used to seeing. The next afternoon, he walked into the troubled location as a regular customer. The restaurant was half full, but the energy was off. Employees looked stressed, tables weren't being cleaned quickly, and customers were waiting too long for food. A young waiter, probably no older than 20, hurried over with a nervous but polite smile. "Hey, welcome in. Sorry for the wait. Can I get you something to drink?" Brandon nodded. "Water, please." The waiter, whose name tag read Liam, rushed off. A few minutes later, he returned with the glass of water and a notepad. "Are you ready to order?" Brandon glanced at the menu and picked a simple burger and fries. Liam wrote it down, thanked him, and rushed off to the kitchen. Brandon had barely taken a sip of his water when he heard a sharp voice. "Liam, what the hell are you doing?" A man in his late 40s with a stocky build and a red face stormed toward the waiter. His name tag read Mike Manager. Liam flinched. I was taking an order." Mike scoffed. From him, he jabbed a finger toward Brandon. "You're wasting time on someone who probably won't even tip. You see that table over there? That's a couple who looks like they actually have money. Serve them first." Liam looked horrified. "But he ordered first." "I don't care," Mike snapped. "You listen to me or you're out of here." Brandon clenched his fists under the table. He had seen bad management before, but this, openly mistreating both employees and customers. He wanted to rip off his disguise and fire Mike on the spot, but he had to see more. Liam swallowed hard and nodded, reluctantly walking over to the other table. Brandon sat there, gripping his glass of water, watching the manager swagger around like he owned the place, barking orders and ignoring customers who didn't look wealthy enough. The food took longer than it should have, and when it finally arrived, it wasn't Liam who brought it, it was Mike himself. He practically tossed the plate onto the table. "There, eat fast and don't linger," Mike said coldly before walking off. Brandon had seen enough. Tomorrow, everything would change. Brandon left the restaurant that evening with his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The scene replayed in his mind. Liam shrinking under Mike's barked orders, customers ignored based on their appearance, the blatant disrespect. He had built this company on the belief that every customer mattered, that employees deserved a workplace where they felt valued. Now, at least in this location, that belief had been stomped into the ground. He didn't sleep much that night. His mind raced through everything he'd witnessed. He needed to act, and fast. The next morning, Brandon arrived at the restaurant before it opened. He wasn't in disguise anymore. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, dark slacks, and the confidence of someone who was about to change everything. As he stepped inside, the first person he saw was Liam, setting up tables for the day. The young waiter looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes hinted at a rough night, and his movements were sluggish, like his energy had been drained. Brandon approached him. Liam glanced up, then did a double take. His eyes widened. You're, he stammered. Brandon nodded. "Brandon Ellis, the owner." Liam's face went pale. "Oh my God." Before Liam could say anything else, the kitchen door swung open and Mike walked out. The manager was sipping coffee, his usual scowl in place. He barely glanced at Brandon before turning his attention to Liam. "Why are you just standing there? Get back to work," Mike snapped. Brandon took a step forward. His voice was calm but firm. "He's fine where he is." Mike looked at him properly for the first time and froze. His eyes darted to the expensive watch on Brandon's wrist, then to his face. Recognition hit him like a freight train. His posture stiffened and his coffee cup trembled slightly in his grip. "Mr. Ellis," he said, his voice suddenly a shade too polite. "What a surprise. If I'd known you were coming, I would have." Brandon cut him off. "I was here yesterday." Mike blinked. "What?" Brandon's stare didn't waver. "I was here, sitting at that table in the corner, watching everything." Mike's face lost color, his mouth opened, then shut again. Brandon let the silence stretch just long enough before speaking again. "So let's talk about what I saw." Mike forced a chuckle, though it was shaky. "Sir, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Yesterday was a busy day. Things might have looked a little off, but I assure you," Brandon's voice was like steel. "You yelled at an employee for serving me because you judged me as a customer who wouldn't tip. You ignored diners and treated them differently based on how much money you assumed they had. You threw a plate of food on my table like I wasn't worth your time. Tell me, Mike, what exactly am I misunderstanding?" Mike swallowed hard. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but it wasn't anger, it was panic. "Sir, I didn't realize it was you," he stammered. "That's the problem," Brandon shot back. "It shouldn't matter who I am. Every customer deserves respect. Every employee deserves to work without fear of being humiliated." Mike's forehead glistened with sweat. "Mr. Ellis, please, I've been with this company for years. I've put my heart into this place." Brandon folded his arms. "And that's supposed to excuse your behavior." Mike's breath came faster. He glanced around as if searching for an escape. Liam was still standing there, frozen, eyes darting between them. Other employees trickled in, sensing something big was happening. Mike's tone turned desperate. "I can fix this. I can change. Yesterday was a bad day, that's all." Brandon's expression didn't soften. "How many bad days have there been, Mike?" Mike opened his mouth, but no words came. Brandon turned to Liam. "How often does this happen?" Liam hesitated, glancing at Mike. Brandon caught that. "You can be honest, there won't be consequences not for you." Liam exhaled slowly. "It happens a lot." His voice was quiet but steady. "Customers complain about the service, but they don't know what goes on behind the scenes. A lot of us," he glanced at the other employees who were now standing in the doorway, listening, "we're scared to say anything. If we mess up, even a little, Mike makes sure we know we're replaceable." Brandon's gaze returned to Mike. "I built this company from the ground up," Brandon said, his voice unwavering, "and I will not have someone like you destroying it." Mike's breath hitched. "Please," Brandon didn't let him finish. "You're done here." Mike's face crumpled. "Sir, I need this job. You needed to respect it," Brandon interrupted, "and you didn't." Mike's shoulders slumped. His eyes darted around the room, but no one spoke up for him. Brandon turned to the staff. "Things will change, starting today." Liam let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. Mike stood there for a moment longer, then, realizing there was no saving himself, turned and walked toward the exit. His steps were slow, reluctant, but there was no fight left in him. The door swung shut behind him. Brandon turned back to the employees. "We're going to rebuild this place the right way. I want to hear from all of you what's been going wrong, what needs to change, and I promise I'll listen." For the first time in a long time, the restaurant felt lighter. The restaurant was silent in the wake of Mike's departure. Employees stood frozen, absorbing what had just happened. There was no cheering, no immediate relief, just the weight of years of mistreatment settling in. For some, it was probably the first time they had seen real accountability in action. Brandon scanned the faces around him. Some looked uncertain, others wary. He understood why. One bad manager being fired didn't erase the damage done. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. He turned to Liam, who was still gripping the edge of a nearby table as if needing to steady himself. "Let's sit down," Brandon said, motioning toward a booth. "I want to hear everything." Liam hesitated, glancing at the other employees. A few looked at each other, unsure, but when Brandon sat down, Liam cautiously followed. One by one, the others trickled in, filling the surrounding tables. Brandon leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I don't want sugar-coated answers. I need the truth. What's been happening here?" There was a pause. Then, a woman in her late 30s, wearing a kitchen apron, spoke up. "Mike wasn't just bad with customers," she said. "He ran this place like a dictatorship. If you questioned anything, you were on his bad side, and once you were there, he made your life hell. A younger man, probably a line cook, nodded. He cut shifts for people he didn't like. Sometimes he'd call someone in just to send them home early, just to mess with them. Another voice chimed in. He kept tips from the staff, said they were being redistributed fairly, but we never saw any of it. Brandon's jaw tightened. He had suspected poor leadership, but this was blatant exploitation. He had trusted his managers to uphold the standards he built his company on. Clearly, that trust had been misplaced. He looked at Liam. Why didn't anyone report this? Liam rubbed the back of his neck. People were scared. Mike had connections. He made it clear that if anyone went over his head, he'd find a way to ruin them. Some of us depend on this job to survive. No one wanted to take the risk. Brandon exhaled slowly. He couldn't blame them. When your livelihood was on the line, speaking up wasn't easy. He glanced around the room. That stops now. From this point forward, there will be a direct line to me and senior leadership. No more managers acting like untouchable dictators. If something's wrong, I want to hear it. And I promise there will be no retaliation for honesty. The employees exchanged cautious glances. Some looked hopeful, but others still held hesitation in their eyes. They had heard promises before. They needed proof. Brandon nodded, understanding. Actions spoke louder than words. He stood. We're going to fix this, but I need your help. I want to know what's been neglected, what's been overlooked. What do you need to do your jobs better? At first, there was silence. Then the woman in the apron spoke again. We need more staff. Mike refused to hire replacements when people quit. We're constantly short-handed. Another voice added, the kitchen equipment is falling apart. We've been patching things up with duct tape and luck. A younger woman, barely out of her teens, hesitated before speaking. The schedule's been a mess. People don't get the days off they request, and some weeks we get barely enough hours to survive. Brandon absorbed it all. These weren't minor complaints, these were fundamental problems, the kind that drove good employees away and ruined a business from the inside out. He looked over at Liam. You've been here a while, Liam nodded. Almost 2 years. Brandon considered him for a moment. You handled yourself well yesterday. Even when Mike was on you, you didn't lash out or quit on the spot. That tells me you actually care about this place. Liam shifted in his seat, caught off guard. I guess I do, or at least I wanted to. Brandon made a decision. I need someone to help me rebuild this location, someone the staff trusts. Would you be willing to step into an assistant management role? Liam's eyes widened. Me. Brandon nodded. You know the problems, you've lived them, that makes you the best person to help fix them. Liam hesitated, glancing at the others. The staff looked just as surprised as he did. You don't have to answer now, Brandon continued. Think about it. But regardless of your decision, changes are happening. He turned back to the group. Effective immediately, hiring will start to fill the gaps. A full equipment inspection will be done, and whatever needs replacing will be replaced. Scheduling will be corrected to be fair. And from now on, all tips go directly to the employees, no exceptions. A murmur spread through the staff. The wait in the restaurant shifted slightly. It wasn't full relief yet, but it was something close to hope. Brandon glanced at the clock. I know we open soon. I won't keep you from your work, but know this, I'll be back, regularly, and not just here. Every location, I won't let this happen again. Liam met his gaze, and for the first time, Brandon saw something besides exhaustion in his eyes. He saw belief. As the employees dispersed to start their shifts, Brandon stepped outside, taking a deep breath. One bad manager was gone, but the real work was just beginning. Brandon spent the next several days implementing the changes he had promised. He wasn't going to be the kind of leader who made bold statements and then disappeared. This wasn't about damage control, it was about rebuilding a culture that had been neglected for far too long. A new manager was carefully selected, someone with a proven track record of treating employees fairly and maintaining high standards. The hiring process for additional staff began immediately, and within a week, the restaurant was no longer operating on a skeleton crew. The kitchen equipment was inspected and swiftly replaced where necessary. The scheduling system was overhauled, allowing employees to have greater input in their shifts. Brandon made frequent, unannounced visits, not just to this location but to others as well. He wanted to ensure that what had happened under Mike's leadership wasn't happening elsewhere. Employees were encouraged to provide anonymous feedback, and any concerns were addressed swiftly. One afternoon, Brandon returned to the restaurant to check on progress. He walked in without any fanfare, simply observing. The energy in the room was noticeably different. Employees moved with more confidence, customers were receiving attentive service, and tables were being cleared without delay. There was no tension in the air, no employees glancing over their shoulders in fear of being berated. The difference was undeniable. He spotted Liam, who had ultimately accepted the assistant management role. There was a new sense of purpose in the way he carried himself. He was speaking with a line cook, nodding as he listened, before offering a solution to whatever issue had been raised. Brandon approached, and Liam looked up, giving him a respectful nod. Things had changed. Brandon gestured toward the dining area, where customers were being served efficiently. Liam followed his gaze before turning back. His expression was a mix of relief and quiet pride. Brandon asked how the transition had been. Liam admitted that it hadn't been easy. Some employees had been skeptical, unsure if the changes would last. But as time passed and they saw real improvements, trust started to rebuild. There had been challenges, of course. Some habits were hard to break, and not every customer was easy to deal with. But now, employees weren't afraid to address problems. Issues were resolved quickly instead of being ignored. Brandon knew there was still work to be done. No company could be fixed overnight. But this was progress, the kind that lasted. As he prepared to leave, a familiar figure lingered near the entrance. Mike. Brandon hadn't seen him since the day he was fired. The former manager looked different. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with something else. He hesitated before approaching, his movements slow and uncertain. Brandon remained still, waiting. Mike stopped a few feet away, his expression tense. He admitted that he had been wrong, that he hadn't realized how much damage he had caused until it was too late. He said that losing his position had forced him to reflect on how he had treated people. Brandon listened without interrupting. Mike confessed that he had struggled to find another management job. His reputation had followed him, and word had spread about why he had been let go. He didn't ask for his job back. He knew that wasn't an option, but he wanted Brandon to know that he regretted his actions. Brandon considered the words carefully. He had no interest in seeing someone fail, but accountability mattered. Mike hadn't just made a few mistakes, he had created an environment of fear and disrespect. That kind of damage wasn't undone with a single apology. Brandon acknowledged the apology, but made it clear that words alone weren't enough. Change wasn't about regret, it was about actions. He told Mike that if he truly wanted to improve, he needed to prove it through his future choices, not by seeking personal redemption. Mike nodded slowly, accepting the response. He turned and walked away without argument. Brandon exhaled. He wasn't one to hold grudges, but he also wasn't one to forget. Turning back to the restaurant, he saw employees moving with purpose, customers enjoying their meals, and a new manager ensuring that the culture remained intact. This was what leadership was about, not just building a business, but making sure the people within it were valued. And this time, he wouldn't take his eyes off it. Brandon stepped outside, the evening air cool against his skin. The sounds of the restaurant hummed behind him, dishes clinking, muffled conversations, the steady rhythm of a business finally running the way it should. The contrast between now and the mess he had first walked into was undeniable, but he knew better than to assume the work was over. The real challenge wasn't just fixing what had been broken, it was making sure it stayed that way. He walked to his car but didn't get in right away. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from his operations director, Julia, a no-nonsense woman who had been with the company for years. She had been instrumental in the cleanup process, coordinating the logistics behind the major changes. The message was short. "We need to talk. Call me when you're free." Brandon didn't wait. He dialed immediately. Julia picked up on the first ring. There was no small talk. "I've been digging into the other locations," she said. "You're not going to like what I found." Brandon's grip on the phone tightened. "How bad?" Julia sighed. "Bad enough. I've been reviewing employee complaints, anonymous reports, even old exit interviews. The problems at this location weren't isolated. Mike wasn't the only one running things like a tyrant. Brandon leaned against his car, exhaling slowly. He had suspected as much. One rotten manager didn't operate in a vacuum. If this kind of culture had taken root in one restaurant, it was likely festering elsewhere. How widespread? 3 locations stand out immediately. Similar complaints, managers ignoring issues, employees afraid to speak up, customers noticing the decline in service. Some of the reports go back over a year. Brandon closed his eyes briefly, frustration creeping in. He had been so focused on expansion, on growing the brand, that he hadn't seen what was happening beneath the surface. He had trusted his management teams to uphold the standards he had built the company on. That trust had been misplaced. Who's responsible? Julia hesitated. Different managers at each location, but the patterns are the same. I don't think they're all as bad as Mike, but they've definitely been cutting corners. Ignoring complaints, playing favorites, pushing good employees out. If we don't intervene now, it's only going to get worse. Brandon straightened. He wasn't the type to let problems linger. I want full reports on all 3 locations, he said. Everything you've got, I'll visit them myself. Julia didn't sound surprised. I thought you'd say that. I'll send the files over tonight. Brandon hung up and stared at the restaurant in front of him. Fixing one location had been a start, but it wasn't enough. If his company had allowed this kind of management to thrive in multiple places, then the problem wasn't just a few bad hires. It was deeper than that. The next morning, Brandon was already on the road before the sun had fully risen. His first stop was a location he hadn't visited in nearly a year. On paper, it was performing well, sales were stable, and customer traffic was steady. But numbers didn't tell the full story. He walked in unannounced. The first thing he noticed was the tension. Employees moved quickly, but there was no ease in their movements. Conversations were hushed. No one looked relaxed, even when they weren't busy. He took a seat near the counter, observing. A server passed him with a tray, her posture stiff. She offered a polite greeting, but there was something forced about it. He watched as she approached a table and took an order, her voice low, almost hesitant. Then he saw the manager. A tall man with sharp features and a stiff posture stood near the kitchen entrance, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes tracked every movement on the floor. Employees glanced at him subtly, as if gauging his mood before making any decisions. Brandon had seen this kind of work environment before. It was the kind where employees did their jobs out of obligation, not motivation, where mistakes weren't just corrected but punished, where people operated on edge, afraid of drawing the wrong kind of attention. He waited, watching. A young busboy accidentally knocked a glass off a table. It shattered against the floor. The sound barely had time to fade before the manager was there. His voice was low, but the way the busboy shrank back spoke volumes. Brandon stood. He had seen enough. This wasn't just about one bad manager. This was about a culture that had been allowed to take root in multiple locations, unchecked, and it was about to change. For good.